I actually got to go to El Panteón de Belén, which is a cemetery museum. It's the only one in the state of Jalisco. Its original name is El Panteón de Santa Paula, but everyone calls it El Panteón de Belén because before it became a cemetery, it was actually a monastery, and the monks were los Betlemitas, the Bethlemites, and because of that, they just started calling it El Panteón de Belén. So like I said, it's the only cemetery museum in the state of Jalisco. One famous Jalisciense that's still buried in the cemetery is Manuel Gomez Ibarra. He's actually the architect of the cemetery, and along with that, he also designed the towers of the cathedral, and he also designed the dome of Hospicio Cabañas, which has a mural painting by Jose Clemente Orozco. And then he also designed a part of another chapel church that's a few blocks away from the cemetery. Before he died, he also designed his own tomb. He left blueprints and everything with exact measurements of how he wanted, and specified that it had to be placed in the corner of the cemetery where those two walls met. The first person who was to be buried in the cemetery was a woman, and her name was Ana Josefa Cañedo. She was actually buried in 1849. And depending, if you're standing in a very specific spot in the cemetery next to this kind of more built up family type burial area, look at an angle. There's a little broken headstone, and if you look past it, almost as if it were a path, that's where you can see her tombstone. But then that little building that you'd be standing next to, that's actually where the last person was buried in the cemetery. This person, it was actually a man. His name was Salvador Rodriguez, and he was buried in 1981, which is kind of weird because the cemetery was actually closed in 1896. But the reason why is because in 1896, they stopped selling land pieces to families, but they were allowing people to bury their loved ones in the cemetery as long as they had proof of a title that they owned a piece of land in the cemetery. So the part of the cemetery that you can actually walk through and see was the rich part of the cemetery. At the very back, there's a wall and there's a door, and that led to the poor section. Now there is this tower building there, and that is part of the hospital that also belongs to the University of Guadalajara. The rich side is the one that always looked so pretty because they had the money to afford the brick and stone and to hire the architects and designers to create these amazing headstones. But the poor side had none of that. They didn't have the money for it. They couldn't really afford much, so it was just dirt and twigs. So one thing that was actually very interesting while walking around in the cemetery is that there's very few crosses, even though it was a Catholic cemetery. But the reason why is because a lot of the people that are actually buried there, including the architect, were actually Masons. So when you look at the tombs and the headstones, there's a lot of symbology with pyramids and with these oval eye shapes, and also numerology. And our tour guide gave us a lot of information on that, which was really, really cool. And he also mentioned that the architect, Manuel Gomez Ibarra, since he also ended up doing the towers that are on the cathedral, one is actually 36 centimeters taller than the other. So you can't really tell when you're just looking at it. Honestly, I think that was one of my favorite parts of this tour because I really enjoyed like the Da Vinci Code, and I love mystery type stories and things and all of this hidden secrets and things like that. So I thought that was amazing. But another part of the tour that I really loved was all the stories and legends that they tell. There's a Scottish couple that's buried right next to each other, and they would always try and help the poor. When poor people would come to their home and ask for some food, they would always invite them in and feed them and give them a hug on their way out. So a lot of people come to the cemetery and they leave little objects there. It's said that they will make sure that in your home you do not lack a job, food, a roof over your head, or the company of the people who truly, truly love you. Because they had so much love in their lives that they share this love with the people who come and leave offerings to them. There's also another story that he told of a young doctor who passed away at the age of 29 because he had a very weak immune system. And he wanted to help people. He was very rich, and he had 3 rules that he would always follow. Free consultation, help provide treatment for whoever would need it, as long as they wouldn't tell people to never treat the rich. He wanted to help the poor, and he wanted to help as many people as possible. There's a lot of people who go there, and you can see that they have a lot of rosaries, candles, flowers, little objects, and they ask for help. Another one that's very similar with the offerings that are brought is at the tomb of a baby. His name was Ignacio Altamirano. And our tour guide told us that this baby was terrified of the dark. One night there was a huge storm and a gust of wind opened the windows and blew out the candles. This baby was 3 years old and was terrified, so the baby had a heart attack and passed away. After the baby was buried, every morning for about 10 days or so, the body would be found above ground. And the groundskeeper, they didn't know what was happening, so started asking, and the parents said, "We know what's wrong. He's afraid of the dark." So they had a casket commissioned to be built for him above ground. There's a slit that goes through it. So this way, when the sun comes out and even the stars at night, it allows some light to get in, so the baby won't be afraid. So many people come by and they bring little toys or a candy or something and leave it as an offering to the baby. Because again, this legend says that if you leave something, the baby will then follow you and take care of you like a guardian angel. But if you take anything, even the smallest little candy that someone may have left, it will follow you and follow you around until you go back to return it, to teach you that you should not be taking things from someone else. And there were so many things that were placed right around where that baby's tomb was, that they had a little wheelbarrow close to the path where we were walking where people would leave things, and even that was full. Another tomb that also really stood out to me was one of 2 siblings, where they built a stand in what looks like a book. On one page, it has their names and the days that, and the date that they passed away. The other is blank. The reason for it was because a lot of times you have stories represented as someone's life represented as a book. And so this was kind of a way to represent that, well, these children passed away and that was the last page of their book. They were not able to continue it, and so that's why that page was left blank. They also do night tours at the cemetery. And I really wanted to go on the night tour, but my cousin was like, "We're not doing that." Our tour guide actually is usually there for the night tours, so he was still able to tell us a little bit what they do. In one spot, they tell 3 legends. But of the 3, there's one that was my favorite. It's the legend of the vampire that's buried in the cemetery. The legend says that there was a vampire, and when they killed the vampire and the stake that went through the vampire went all the way through his body into the ground, and that stake grew out into a tree. When that tree dies, when it dries up and it dies and it falls over, that the vampire would then be freed. So I thought that was really, really interesting, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So if you ever get the chance, definitely check it out because it's a great experience. If you enjoyed this video, please like and leave a comment down below. Maybe mention what things you liked, or if you've gone before, I'd love to hear stories about it because it's really awesome. You can check out some of my other videos over here on the side, and see you next time.